Mountain Tunes still staying on. Surely he can't, can he? The final flight there, an untidy jump, Crispin, and Mountain Tunes and Tony McCoy now launching a tremendous attack on the outside. He's done it! What a hero! What a sportsman! What a jockey! 4,000 up for Tony McCoy and Mountain Tunes, who claim Crispin.
The Punchestown Festival is just around the corner. It's one of the most exciting periods in the Irish horse racing calendar. You're listening to the BeanBagSports Podcast with Darragh McGinley and myself, Dave O'Grady. We're delighted to be joined by ex-jockey and commentator Richard Pugh of P2P.ie. Richard, thanks for joining us on the BeanBagSports Podcast.
You're more than welcome.
Well, what about Punchestown, Richard? It's probably fair to say that it's as important to Irish racing as, say, Cheltenham would be in Britain.
It is, and it's getting bigger and bigger. I think as Cheltenham has grown its own brand, I think it's by default helped Punchestown to become bigger and bigger. So all of the performances we saw at Cheltenham, we were all season waiting to see would they happen, and now we just want to see them once more to be sure they really did happen, if that makes sense. So is Douvan that good? Is Vautour that good? Or was it a once-off? So Punchestown gives you that second sense of assurance, and it's just going to be a fantastic week.
Speaking of Cheltenham, it was of course dominated by one Mr. Willie Mullins. Do you see Punchestown being the same? He certainly has the ammunition.
He has the ammunition, there's no doubt about that. Can they all click again? I mean, they are racehorses at the end of the day. Somebody said to me before, they're racehorses, they're only human, you know. I think realistically, can they all click again? No. Which one won't? I wouldn't like to have to call it, but they can't all click again. Our job is to try and find out which ones to oppose, because it's too easy to just back them all, isn't it?
Absolutely. Just on a couple of the Mullins runners, Hurricane Fly is set to step up to 3 miles. Do you see him getting the trip?
I've no doubt about him getting the trip. I mean, he settles and he's such an efficient hurdler. I don't think that's even in the mix for being the potential negative for him. I think the only potential negative for him is up in the sky, and that's the sun. If it dries out the way it's drying, he's not as effective at this time of year simply because of the ground. But I had a Turf Club text this morning which said there's going to be 20 millimetres of rain between Friday and next Tuesday. Now, if the rain can soften the ground at all, he wins in my eyes, and if it doesn't, that just could be a problem.
Fantastic. Vautour is to step out of novice company as well for the first time in the champion chase. Is that a brave decision or the right one?
It's neither brave nor the right one. I think it's by default. He has so many horses, Willie, obviously, that he wants to avoid, and that's our loss that they're in the same yard in some respects, because if they weren't, we'd get to see either Undeso versus Vautour or Vautour versus Don Polly, which would be a tremendous finish to the season. So Willie's well within his rights to try and win as many big races as he can, so he's moving Vautour. So is it the right decision? Not necessarily. He by his own admission would prefer not to do it. Is it brave? It's a necessity if he wants to win all the races. Is it a given that he'll win? Far from it. As good as he was at Cheltenham, he did get beaten at Leopardstown, and I've seen plenty of top-class horses move up from novice to the top level and be beaten. I think he will win. I don't think that's any surprise, but I wouldn't be rolling in behind him at 1 to 2 or whatever ridiculous price he could turn up with on the day.
It's going to be exciting stuff. Vautour and Dan Polly, I think a lot of racing fans will be really excited about jumping into that one. I suppose, Richard, looking away from the all-conquering Willie's Mullins Ruby Walsh combination, are there any horses, trainers or jockeys that you'd advise our listeners to keep an eye out for next week?
Yeah, it's very difficult to get away from Willie, really, isn't it? I'd be a little bit more inclined to take on of Willie's bunch, Jack Adam maybe. He's only 6, he's a tough Cheltenham Gold Cup, and I think the Punchestown Gold Cup might be the one maybe that slips by Willie. Road to Riches will enjoy this time of year. He likes good ground. He won the Galway Plate last year. Now he's had a very long season, so that's the obvious negative. Carlingford Lough won at this festival last year. He didn't really show up at Cheltenham, but if he bounces back, he has a chance. And the likes of a Q card coming over, but I don't think Don Cossack will run again. So maybe Road to Riches or Carlingford Lough for the Punchestown Gold Cup. And the one I like in the mares to take on any power with is KTT, who won at Limerick last week for Kevin Prendergast.
You touched on the Gold Cup there, Richard. Is it a worry that the Gold Cup and the World Series are the only 2 big races without odds-on Willie Mullins trained favourites for the Irish racing industry?
Is it a worry? No. These things tend to go in cycles. I mean, when Paul Nicholls pulled out Big Bucks, Mastermind at Denman and Cotto, we all thought it would never change. It was going to be Paul Nicholls forever. And then Nicky Henderson at Simon Sigg, Sprinter Sacre and Bobsworth, and we thought it'll always be Nicky Henderson. And admittedly, Willie's domination is far superior to that, but I still think racing tends to go in cycles, and whilst Willie will be at the top of the tree for many years, I'm not convinced he can continually produce horses of this level to be guaranteed going to festivals at 1 to 2 shots. He might have winners, but not this level of certainty amongst the bookmakers. I can't see that lasting.
Yeah, it's been remarkable. Even just looking at some of the odds, Annie Power 1 to 5, Foggeen 1 to 3, Don Polly 4 to 7, Undeso 1 to 5, and Vautour 1 to 2. It's really...
It's a brave man's accumulator, isn't it?
I'm sure though, Richard, there'd be a lot of people getting on that, Is there any outsiders or naps that you could go for with this? Give our listeners something that's maybe a little bit outside the box. Obviously, they'll be jumping on the train of Mullins anyway, that's for sure. But if there's anyone there looking to maybe just pick something else, is there anybody you can go for?
At this stage, not really. I think Warren in the Hunter Chase, he fell early in Aintree. He doesn't necessarily stay. Well, that's not true. He absolutely doesn't stay the trip. But I think given the lack of depth, I don't know if On the Fringe is going to turn up. So Prince Devotion will probably win. But I'd be very surprised if Warren is out of the 3. So if he's an each way bet, maybe he just might be one for Brian Hamilton and Sam Willie Cohen if he goes there to maybe be an each way bet. But realistically, your each way bets, your big prices are in the handicaps, and we just really need to see those entries come in to try and evaluate them.
Can't wait for Punchestown. It's going to be fantastic. Richard AP McCoy, the legendary jockey, we're going to be creating a little bit of history now because he's going to be in his last race at Sandown. The 20-time champion jockey. He's won nearly all the races in the game. He's on a horse called Box Office. It's going to be a fantastic spectacle, and one that the racing public are never going to forget.
Yeah, I mean it's just hard to believe, and I don't think it has sunk in with us. I mean we've got caught up in the fanfare of Tony McCoy retiring, which was very generous of him, but I don't think it's really sunk in that he's not going to be around next year. Certainly not with me anyway. And I think Sandown have a sellout crowd on Saturday, and I'm sure there'll be people on the gates or trying to look over the trees to see him for the final time. If he can pull a winner, it will be just fantastic for him. It'll be a lovely way for him to go out and a fitting way for him to go out. But racing doesn't make for stories like that. If he's on the best horse or nearly the best horse, he might win, but it's going to be a tough decision for him during the week. And I actually wonder, I'd imagine a lot of trainers would be keen to have him ride their horse on his last day. So I'd imagine he has, maybe not known to the industry or to the public, but I'd imagine he has a lot more choice in those races than even we know. I'd say even riders would step down to give him that last win, So I'd be fascinated to see what he ends up riding in each of those races at the weekend.
Richard, what do you think it was about AP that has made him so successful over so many years?
Oh, drive to succeed, fear of failure maybe. I mean, the interesting thing about Tony McCoy is, and by his own admission, he's not the most talented jockey we've ever seen. He's the most successful jockey. I mean, if somebody outside of racing is listening to this, I mean, in the same way that maybe Roy Keane hadn't the same talent as Lionel Messi, but in certain matches might have been more effective, Tony McCoy was just thoroughly effective every time he sits on a horse. And his toughness to keep coming back, his professionalism to never put up a pound overweight in 20 years, it's just unsurpassed. He brought a professionalism to an era that didn't have it. I mean, with respect to jockeys 20 years ago, it was a much more sociable way of making a living than it is now, and Tony McCoy is the reason.
I often think, Richard, about the whole mental side of things, and how hard do you think it's going to be for AP seeing horses he would have ridden in the past winning big races maybe without him on their back, and a lot of people are asking the question, is there any potential there for a U-turn on his decision to retire?
Look, I'd say if he could make a U-turn, he would. He's different, and that's why we don't understand him. I mean, I look at every other jockey that ever retired. So you see the likes of Mick Fitzgerald, who's on television all of the time, or John Frankham, and all these guys, Peter Scudamore. They're all able to get up and get on with life and move on with it. The only person who's the exception and is still driven literally to the North Pole is Richard Dunwoody, and we all kind of fit Tony McCoy into that bracket where he's the one person you think maybe won't deal with it quite so well. But something, life is good for him, and if he can't deal with that, I wouldn't make too much out of it. That's what I'd call a first world problem.
We know about his success, but he's also a gentleman of the highest order and a real great ambassador to the sport. How do you think the other guys in the weigh room will react now not having him around?
Oh, they'll be delighted. 250 winners spare next year. These are competitive guys, and as much as they respect him, if they're not aware that there's 250 spare winners floating around next year, they're in the wrong business. That's your job, is to ride winners. And if you're second jockey to Tony McCoy, if you're a young like Maurice Linehan or Richie McLernan there in John Joe Neal's yard, you'd be absolutely thrilled that he's gone. Thanks be to God, it took him long enough to go. And it's the very same. If Ruby Walsh announces retirement next week, I'd be gutted, you'd be gutted, and Paul Townend to do a dance. And it's the very same. These guys, it's the same as when a footballer comes off the pitch, the sub is only delighted.
Richard, the speculation of Barry Geraghty leaving Nicky Henderson's yard to link up with McManus as McCoy's replacement, is there any substance to those rumours?
I'd say there's more chance that you or I might get the job than Barry Geraghty in England. I mean, if you think about it, I don't think anybody will do. Maybe JP will give Barry Geraghty a job. I certainly have no inside information on it, but I don't believe anybody will do what Tony McCoy did for JP McManus, and that is, and by both of their willingness for it to happen, to go from Ludlow to Plumpton to Toaster to Uttoxeter, it couldn't be further from what Barry Geraghty has done to date. Barry has ridden nice horses, and good luck to him, he's done it extremely well throughout his career. He had the Kicking King Moscow Flyer era, he had the Simon Sig Splinter Sacra era. Now he's getting onto the younger horses of Nicky Henderson's again, and they're starting to restock and trying to find the next champions. But Barry Geraghty going from Ludlow to Toaster to Plumpton to Uttoxeter, can you see it happen?
I don't think so, no, absolutely not.
One of the things, just before we let you go, Richard, because we're running out of time here on the podcast, he's been a remarkable champion. We're never going to forget him. What for you has been the most memorable moment of AP McCoy?
It's not a moment. The most memorable thing, when you look back in 100 years' time at Tony McCoy, it won't be one ride, it'll be the numbers, the figures and the stats. The 4,300 winners, the 20 successive titles. It's just the relentlessness of it, and that's what he'll be remembered for. No question, no doubt about that.
Well, Richard Pugh, we hope he is. We know he will be, in fact. Thanks a million for joining us on the BeanBag Sports Podcast. We look forward to taking the pleasure of your company sometime in the near future.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy the week.
Some great stuff there by Richard Pugh of P2P.ie. Well, there you have it, Darragh. The fairy tale could be written this week at Sandown. A lot of people watching the Grand National thought he was going to get it there in the end, but obviously horse racing doesn't follow the script.
It should be a fantastic weekend. The hype around Sandown for a race in the middle of April is brilliant. 18,000 are expected at the course on Saturday, so fingers crossed everyone will be willing McCoy over the line in the last race there.
It was very key though, wasn't it? He got that win at Cheltenham, his last ever Cheltenham, and I think it was on day 3 in the Ryanair Chase he got that win, and then at the final day when he was coming up in the AP McCoy Chase, it wasn't to be, but he could really enjoy that, I suppose.
The pressure was lifted from him when he got the win. He did have to wait until his 14th race of the festival to get over the line in first place, so it was a monkey off his back. The pressure he could enjoy the last day then, as you mentioned, he didn't quite do it in the AP McCoy Chase, but there was nothing left for him to achieve in the sport. He's done fantastically. He's a legend and he's going to go down in history, and I don't think he's ever going to be beaten, as Richard said, figures wise.
What's your favourite McCoy moment?
I think you're going to have to look back to the 2010 Grand National. 15th attempt and aboard Don't Push Thee came in. Romtome, if I remember correctly. For such a legend not to have won the biggest race of all would have been a pity. So for him to finally win it was a relief to himself and all the fans. Everyone was delighted to see him. I don't remember there being as such a popular Grand National winner as there was in 2010.
Incredible. One of my favourite McCoy moments was actually an off the race card moment. It was the day after I think he retired, and he was in Leopardstown as far as I know, and I heard a story that a taxi driver picked him up and said to the man in the back of the car, "Were you at Leopardstown?" And the man replied, "Yes, I was." And the taxi driver says, "Oh, did you hear AP McCoy retired?" And he said, "Yes." And of course, sitting in the back seat was AP McCoy.
Absolutely brilliant. But that's a testament to the man. It shows you how down to earth he is, and he isn't bothered by fame at all.
Incredible stuff. Well, I'm afraid we have to leave it there on the BeanBag Sports Podcast. Best of luck to AP McCoy this weekend, and if you're going to the Punchestown Festival next week, we hope you enjoy it. It's going to be a cracker. From Darragh McGinley, myself, Dave O'Grady, take care.